I think you made a transition from competitive endurance runner into what were we calling it early? Into a
Uh,
conceptual runner. And
yeah.
I'm curious about that time. And I want, do you think it was something, um, was a decision you made on purpose? Some part where you're like, you know what, I'd rather do this than do that. Uh, or was it more just over time you realized that maybe, going to every race or whatever ultra trail challenge maybe wasn't the direction you wanted to go? So I'm curious about that transition from competitive athlete to conceptual athlete. Oh,
Yeah, so I mean, it was definitely, I mean, you can kind of look at it as a very quick transition and a very slow transition. I've always been interested in telling stories, and so when I was getting into competitive ultra and trail and mountain running, I went over to Europe for a year, and then I came back and I approached Trail Runner magazine, who's based out of Carbondale, and I was up in Aspen at the time, so just 20
cool.
miles away. I was able to go and knock on their door and throw some ideas at them. And I just said like, hey, listen, I just had this incredible experience over in Europe, racing over there. The trail scene, the mountain scene is just so much more amped up than it is in the States. And this is I'm talking 10 plus years ago, coming up on
Yeah,
12 years ago. And they said, great, write about it. We'll work together and we'll publish something. And so that was the start of
that's cool.
10 years of writing feature-length articles for Trail Runner, which was just like the most rewarding thing in the world. Like,
Mm,
you can learn a lot about writing by taking writing courses, and you can learn a lot about writing and by just kind of sitting down and at your computer and trying to put words down. But when there's this incentive of getting published and telling your story, it and having people that are willing to work with you on it, then it just takes it to an entire different level. And I was really lucky to be able to take advantage of that.
that's really
So
cool.
yeah, so it was so I started to kind of think a lot about my trips beforehand. I would meditate on the trip beforehand, like, okay, like I can't write this story before the trip actually happens, but I can certainly start to think about it. And like, how do I want to tell this story? Like, what might be important about it? And it also, you go into this trip, whether it's a race or a challenge or just going to run with a few friends on a different continent, you just start to pay attention to everything around you a little bit more acutely. And so that's when this is the slow transition into what I'm doing today, is just kind of thinking about these things beforehand, preemptively. Um, and then it was about probably 4 years ago, 24, coming up on 5 years ago, 2016, right around then, when I frankly was kind of getting burnt out a little bit from all the racing and the traveling that I was doing. I knew I didn't want to quit running. I didn't want to quit my relationship with Solomon. I didn't want to quit the community, because I cherish all of those things immensely. But I did know that the lifestyle that I was living wasn't sustainable, and frankly, it wasn't. It was no longer fun for me. When you're done with traveling, at least for a little bit, is when you're offered a free trip to Madeira and you're turning it down. It's like, because
Yep.
it's not fun for me anymore. And so that's when I started to kind of reassess like what my goals were in the sport and kind of in life, I guess. And so that's when I came up with this idea to run across the country.
That's
And I
so
approached
cool.
and I approached Solomon with it, and I said, "Listen, I know you guys are much more of a performance-based, competitive-based company, and I understand if this isn't exactly your thing, but let's chat about this. I want to run across the country. I want to document it. I want to put it out there and share it with people, and I want to offer it up as something that I genuinely believe that other people can do." Both based on budget and the pace that I was running.
Hmm.
So I told him that I'm doing it for $5,000, that I'm doing it under my own
Wow.
budget. I'm going to take 5 months to do it, as opposed to trying to break a record on it. I'm going to
Right.
be self self-sufficient,
Support.
self-supported, and much to a little bit to my surprise and much to my contentment, they agreed to go along with it, and that kind of helped me move into a different realm of running that it's really helped me grow. It's helped me
That's
appreciate the
cool.
sport more, and it's also helped me appreciate the world and the country and society more, and it's also helped me get to know myself quite a lot more. So
That's cool. That makes a lot of sense to me in terms of the writing element of almost writing for trail runner, starting to see how like telling stories could come about, and then almost the stories going from racing, and then you wanting to tell a different story, like almost setting it up to be
mm,
like, you know what story I'd like to read, like
yeah,
this one. So I'm gonna
yeah,
go do it or something like that, and
yeah,
almost it becoming an impetus or an inspiration for
totally.
Transamericana. And I know there was other, I've seen the movie, other people might have heard some of your podcasts, but I think the timing is really interesting too of what America was going through in terms of division, and then you running this Transamericana um, expedition kind of thing going on. So maybe you can, I'd like to hear a little bit more about that, if that had anything to do with it in 2016.
Yeah, so 2016 elections really had nothing to do with my
Hmm.
decision to run across the country.
Yep.
I had planned this trip regardless of how the election was going to go, and me, much like a lot of my peers and social circle, thought that the election was going to go a much different way, and was totally
Sure.
crushed when it didn't go that way. Um, but one thing that I took away immediately from that election is that my run across the country was going to be way more interesting than it was if I was on, like, quote unquote, the winning side. And so it just kind of set me up for a lot more learning than I had anticipated, and being in a position to listen rather than to to talk.
Hmm. That's so cool. And if anybody hasn't seen it, I'd recommend going. It's on YouTube. It's free, right? It's presented by
Yep.
Solomon. So Transamericana, you can look it up under Rickey Gates. Really cool documentary. I think it's only like 30 minutes long, something like that.
75.
Oh,
Yeah.
that was a big one. So maybe I'm thinking of
Yeah.
Every Single Streets, which was a lot,
Yeah.
little shorter. And we'll get to
Yeah.
that. But can you share, I don't know, one anecdote that kind of brings your experience to light from Transamericana? Like maybe it was one experience or one interaction that kind of gives a good sense of uh, what you found out on the road across America.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
mean, like
I know there's a
so
lot of them.
many. Yeah, I mean, there are a whole lot of them. But amazingly, what I found is, like, so many of them, at least the ones that really stick in my brain, took place in the South. I purposefully, like, I was very meticulous in my planning for the trip, in terms of where I wanted to start, where I wanted to finish, what sort of terrain I wanted to go through. I wanted to hit trails. I wanted to be on roads. I wanted to go through cities. I wanted to go through mountain ranges. I wanted to be by myself. I wanted to be surrounded by a bunch of people. Um, sort of in contrast to say doing a through hiking trail where you're just on the trail the whole time, and for the most part you're just hanging out with either fellow through hikers or
Yep.
possibly some trail angels out there. But I just wanted to experience America as
Mm.
best I could, and I knew that this was going to be a great opportunity to do so. And so I purposefully spent as much time in the South as I could, because to me that's in my personal life, that's been one of the more foreign parts of the country, in my own in my visual map of the United States. and
Hmm.
and I was just so warmly received by so many people all throughout the South. And then in one place in particular, so I guess this isn't technically the South. I had just gotten into Oklahoma, and that a lot of people would make that distinction there. But I had spent yet another night in the rain,
Mm.
with a less than adequate tarp. My sleeping bag was completely soaked. I hardly slept at all through the night.
Yeah,
I
you're
was
loving life.
cold.
right now.
Yeah, just loving life. Yeah, exactly. And it was very clear that another rainstorm was coming that next night. And I pulled into this town of Ralston and went to the local convenience store and just asked the lady behind the counter there if she knew of any bridges or barns or open garages or anything. Like I was open for anything, any sort of shelter. Like there was no hotel in that town or anything. And with she wasn't even able to say anything. The gentleman behind me in line, with tattoos all over his hands, a tattoo on his eye. He had long hair braided down. It was pretty clear to me that the guy had probably spent some time in prison, and sure enough, he did. He'd spent about
Yep.
5 years in prison, and he just tapped me on the shoulder and asked if I was going to steal anything from his house, and I told him that I wasn't, and he said, "All right, you're staying with me tonight then."
Oh my gosh.
And we ended up spending the next 5 or 6 hours just hanging out at his table, exchanging stories, and it was just I remember then I'm like, this is like, I could not like have this experience if it wasn't for this run. Like you have to like something about being on foot with a backpack and like clearly like um, not threatening, that it puts you in such a humble position that people are much more receptive and warm and open. And I just loved it so much. I reflect back on that often because I do wonder, like, because I live here in Santa Fe, everything's great here, but like if I go talk to a random stranger on the street, it's not quite the same. They're wondering what I want out of this conversation or like
Yeah.
what's going on there. But when you're wearing what I kind of considered to be a costume, these shorts, t-shirt, like I smell bad, like I've got a big beard, I'm very, very skinny. Like I've got my running poles with me. So I've got this costume. Like people want to talk to you. They want to
Yeah,
know
they
what's
want to
going on.
know. Yeah. And you've made
Yeah,
yourself vulnerable, I think, at that point,
yeah,
right? Like you've dropped,
totally.
you're not trying to be anything else other than what you're wearing because that's all you've got. And I
Yeah,
wonder if that then allows other people to do the same. Like, oh, this guy's just coming at me with nothing. I'm just going
totally.
to be me as well.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.